Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you're all having a wonderful day so far. It seems like we don't have anybody in the chat for right now, so we'll just leave this be for now and see if we can get anybody in here. So I'll start once we get the first guy.
I don't think that's the flex that the government thinks it is. I think there is deep
Okay, guys. I know it's no, we don't have anybody in the chat here, but we're just gonna start watching question period. Got everything all set up, so let's do this thing.
I don't think that's the flex that the government thinks it is. I think there is deep concerns about the economy, and I outlined that earlier in my speech.
When we return to this, the honourable member for Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock will have about 4 minutes in his questions and comments. But we'll move on to statements by members. Déclaration de député. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that foreign interference is a very serious issue in Canada. You can think in terms of extortion, murder, political interference, all through foreign interference. And it's interesting, now we know that the leadership convention in which the current leader of the Conservative Party was elected, that there is foreign interference with respect to that leadership. In fact, we had one of the Conservative candidates for the leadership that actually came before committee, Mr. Speaker, and virtually affirmed that foreign interference was, in fact, a part of the Conservative leadership convention. In fact, Madam Speaker, one of the current members of the Conservative Party, the member from Calgary Nose Hill, is, in fact, someone that has been influenced by foreign interference, Mr. Speaker. The question is, why does the Conservative Party not recognize today, as it did last year when they were popping all over the place demanding that foreign interference is an issue, but not today? Why is it that the leader of the Conservative Party does not get the security clearance, Mr. Speaker?
Order. And I know we all tried our best during statements by members to pay attention to what's going on and so keep the noise down to a minimum. The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, in 2023 there were 3,428 organ transplants in Canada performed, with 184 being heart transplants. 132 people were awaiting a heart transplant, and 13 people passed away while waiting for a donor in 2023. The data for 2024 is not out yet, but thank you to a donor, my sister Anne will be one of this year's statistics for individuals who received a heart transplant. On January 9th, the transplant team, coordinated by Grant Fisher at the University Hospital, saved my sister's life. On behalf of my family, I would like to thank the following people who have made us all believe in miracles. The heart transplant team with Dr. Smith, Dr. Davey, and Dr. D. Fifth floor cardiac ICU, the fourth floor transplant ICU, physio with Kristen Morris and Tracy Fuller, and social worker Heather Sadler. And to the surgeon, Dr. Dave Nickpaul, the team has changed our family's lives. By August, my sister saw both her son and her daughter both get married, and soon Anne will be able to watch her granddaughter Collins meet her new cousin. None of this would have been possible if it wasn't for a donor. To Anne's heart donor and to their family, thank you so much. You too can be a donor. Please give the gift of life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Cool. So it seems like we're just going to go through comments first. So that'll be a good time to get people into the chat.
The people of the country of Georgia are courageously fighting for their freedom, democracy, and a European future. Tens of thousands are protesting peacefully despite facing intimidation, violence, and mass arrests. In the last 2 weeks, 500 individuals have been detained, with 70% reporting ill treatment, and over 80 required hospitalization. Yet no accountability has been demanded from those responsible for the excessive force. The government is escalating its crackdown, targeting activists at their homes and violating their rights. The ruling Georgian Dream Party is proposing amendments to Georgia's law on assemblies that would further restrict peaceful protest. We stand in solidarity with the Georgian people in their right for human rights and democracy. I call for the immediate release of all detained activists and accountability for abuses. As we celebrate International Human Rights Day, we applaud the courage of the Georgian people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Mr. Speaker, I'm rising to reflect on the remarkable life and work of Dr. Gurdev Singh Gill. His passing was a devastating loss, and my thoughts are with his wife, Jacinder, his daughter, Jasmine, his son, Sanji, and their families. Dr. Gill immigrated to Canada in 1949 and soon after graduated from the UBC medical program. He became the first Canadian of South Asian origin to practice medicine and was awarded the Order of BC. He's been described as a pioneer, a role model who showed both adults and children that with passion and determination they could achieve anything. His advocacy for aspiring Indo-Canadian medical professionals and his efforts to improve healthcare access for immigrants set him apart. Dr. Gill also had a lasting impact in Punjab, India. He founded the Indo-Canadian Friendship Society of BC, improving clean drinking water, sanitation, and infrastructure for over 100,000 people in India. His legacy reminds us of the power we all have to improve the lives of those around us. Rest in peace, Dr. Gill.
The honourable member for Don Valley West.
Mr. Speaker, as we stand on the threshold of this holy season, I want to wish all those celebrating in Don Valley West and around the world a very happy Christmas. The promise of Christmas is that love can and will break through all the cynicism, disappointment, pain, and despair that continues to this day, long after Jesus walked the dusty roads of Palestine. Christmas didn't happen just once. It happens every time someone lights a candle to make the way a little easier for another person. It happens every time someone welcomes a refugee or a broken person into their community. It happens every time we lift another person up, giving them more love, more hope, more success. Christmas is a hard time for many. This Christmas, welcome the stranger, feed the hungry, give hope to the lost. Let's make Christmas happen again.
The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' elastic deficit is a source of tension between the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. Should the inflationary deficit be increased to $46 billion or $40 billion? That is the question. In the Conservative Party, the answer is simple. We have to stop the planned tax hikes and abolish the carbon tax, stop fueling inflation by cutting unnecessary inflationary spending, stop adding to the debt by implementing the dollar-for-dollar law. Instead, the Globe and Mail reported this week that the Prime Minister is preparing his next sleight of hand, replacing the Finance Minister with unelected banker Mark Carney. This Prime Minister is churning out finance ministers after finance minister, hoping to justify his disastrous policies, but Canadians aren't fooled, Mr. Speaker. We ask the Liberals only one thing: just stop, stop, and stop.
The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, in 2021, as COVID-19 cases surged in Kingston, Dr. Elaine Ma coordinated innovative drive-through vaccine clinics, crucial for our community's health at the time of great uncertainty.
Yeah, pretty much that's what's been happening for the
Queen's
last
University students, the public health
ever.
unit, and
Apparently,
volunteers. Dr. Ma was widely recognized for her heroic efforts in vaccinating thousands of people
Christian
throughout
Freeland
the Kingston
and
region.
Justin Trudeau
Now,
are arguing
years
over
later,
an
OHIP
extra $6 billion to our
based on technicalities related
budget.
to the distribution of those vaccines. OHIP has seemingly forgotten the dire and urgent circumstances of the pandemic that required innovative solutions.
I'll most
from
likely
healthcare professionals
pause
like Dr.
this when
Today,
I'm talking,
calling on
just
Premier
so
Doug Ford,
I'm
his
not
Minister of
over
Health,
talking
and
these
OHIP
guys.
to drop this nonsense claim against Dr. Ma and start acknowledging and celebrating the heroic efforts of our healthcare providers during and throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
The honourable member for Northwest Territories.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to a beloved Northerner and a friend who passed away last week. Patricia Rose Sear, later known as Gail, was a former Yellowknife City Councillor for a decade and worked tirelessly for the advancement of Indigenous people. Gail had a passion for justice and was a strong advocate for women. In recognition for her lifetime of dedication to helping others, she was the recipient of the Order of Canada in 2021. She leaves behind an incredible legacy. My condolences to her family and loved ones at this difficult time. We're going to miss her. Masi cho, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, groceries, gas and home heating are getting more and more expensive, and a 2-month tax trick is nothing but a lump of coal in Canadians' Christmas stockings. As we await the fall economic statement, the Finance Minister has to worry about carbon tax Carney breathing down her neck as the Prime Minister tries his best to entice him to take over for her. Liberal tensions on deficit spending are said to be causing this internal Christmas conflict, but common sense Conservatives can offer some advice to help. Just stop. Stop all planned tax hikes, especially the job-killing carbon tax hikes. Stop fueling inflation by cutting wasteful spending and axing the sales tax on new homes. And stop adding debt by confirming that the deficit has not crashed through the $40 billion guardrail the Finance Minister promised. Canadians need this reckless, wasteful and incompetent NDP Liberal government to stop so we can start a carbon tax election and bring common sense solutions Canadians need and deserve.
The honourable member for...
I just saw the projections, though, for what our budget is actually going to be, and it's going to be around like $60 billion when you put everything into account. It's going to be crazy.
Glengarry Prescott Russell.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to underline the spirit of Christmas which we have in our region. Food banks and volunteers spend hours and hours to make sure that families in need spend a good Christmas with a full stomach, and to make sure that children who don't have the means will receive a Christmas gift and they will have their hearts in the right place. Mr. Speaker, this will be the last time that I will be able to wish you a happy Christmas in this House, so I will do that to my father, mother, my brother Matthew and his children, and my spouse, and my
all my colleagues in this chamber, obviously the staff who makes us look smart. J'aimerais souhaiter joyeux Noël à mes amis.
I'd like to wish a happy Christmas to Louise, Lean, and Carol, and Trevor, Ian and Hugo and Emma. I wish everyone in my riding a happy new year and Merry Christmas. I hope you will have time to spend the holidays with friends and family.
And I'd love to wish everybody a Merry Christmas as well.
Bow River.
Thank you,
Come
Mr.
on,
Speaker.
let's put this question period up.
Next week, Canadians will learn of this Liberal government's complete failure to keep the country's finances in check. Just one day before the Liberals trying to run and hide from their fiscal fiasco and of their own making. New reports suggest things are so bad behind closed doors, the Prime Minister is going to give the boot to yet another woman in his cabinet in his latest desperate attempt to save his own skin. This time, the Finance Minister will once again be blamed and take the fall for crashing Canada's economy because this Prime Minister can't help himself. Just
Thanks,
like he did
Joint
with the
Clause.
first
That-
female Indigenous.
It's really
Justice
awesome
Minister
you
some years
guys
ago. Before any more
subscribing to my
damage can be
channel.
done,
It's crazy.
Conservatives demand increased simple
Craziness.
things from whoever seems to be in charge on that side. Just stop. Stop all the planned Liberal tax hikes, especially the quadrupling of the carbon tax. Stop inflation.
Hopefully we can have a little bit fun in this
debt
chat.
to our withering economy. And if this languishing Liberal government can't or won't, listen to these simple demands. Common sense Conservatives will fix what the NDP Liberals broke in a carbon tax election.
Here, here. The honourable member for South Shore, St. Margaret's.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, spending has gotten so bad that even Liberals are concerned. The Finance Minister promised Canadians that the deficit wouldn't be a penny over $40 billion. She promised that it would be her fiscal guardrail. When someone goes over a guardrail, they don't stop. They go right over into the abyss. And the problem is so bad that even Liberals are commenting like this. I think we do need to show fiscal restraint, said one of them. Another Liberal said this. I think that if we state that we had a $40 billion guardrail, we stay within those numbers. To save her skin from the phantom finance minister, conflict of interest carbon tax Carney, the current finance minister has begun selling furniture in order to pay the rent. Liberals just sold $3 billion worth of Air Canada stock in the last 48 hours. And desperate Liberals will do anything to save their sinking ship. The solution is simple. They should just stop. Stop increasing spending. Stop increasing taxes. Stop increasing inflation and call a carbon tax election.
Well, I can't believe that you could have somebody unelected in cabinet just appointed by the Prime Minister. I know, like, I watched Northern Perspective today, and apparently the Harper government did it too. And that just boggles the mind, to be particularly honest.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. It's been 1 year since the Liberal government launched the Canadian Dental Care Plan. The results are nothing short of remarkable. In just 12 months, 3 million Canadians have been approved for coverage. And since over 1.2 million people have accessed affordable dental care in all our communities across Canada. That's 1.2 million brighter smiles, 1.2 million healthier families, and 1.2 million reasons to celebrate. And talking about reasons to celebrate, tomorrow we're cutting GST on all essential goods. We're talking about food, children's clothes and toys, books, beer and wine. That's cutting sales tax for 2 months to help Canadians. And we're just getting started. Speaker, our government will continue to stand by Canadians, breaking down barriers and ensuring access to the help they need. Let's keep the momentum going and help Canada shine brighter, one smile at a time.
I mean, it's awesome that there's less taxes, but really, if it's going to cost us a total of like $7 billion to put in this GST tax bill, and they're not even going to take off the carbon tax, it's useless, especially for Albertans who are not going to pay or don't pay PST. Like, that 5% is nothing.
Mark, I think he's asking
The honourable member for Windsor West.
The Liberal Labour Minister has intervened in the negotiation process and ordered the CUP-W members back to work, similar to what they have done in the past with the Conservatives. Not respecting the bargaining process led to this in the very first place. No one makes the decision to go on strike lightly, especially as the holidays approach. This was a result of decades of disrespect and disregard. Postal workers are crucial for our communities, often having to work late into the night. They do more for the mail delivery. They keep us connected and our streets safe. Their absence during the strike has been deeply felt by all, proving their value for our present and our future. While Canada Post CEO Doug Ettinger makes $500,000 per year and executives easily over six figures, our dedicated postal workers are simply asking for a fair deal and safe working conditions. To postal workers across Canada, I and New Democrats stand with you. Undermining the bargaining process comes at your expense, the public's expense, and a successful future for Canada Post that provides a key service in a functioning democracy and a successful economy.
Here, here.
The honourable member for Montarville. On this cold December 13th, imagine being forced to leave your home at gunpoint, forced to embark on a ship into the unknown, only to realize with horror that this ship was going to become your tomb at the bottom of the icy waters of the Atlantic. This was the fate of nearly 850 Acadians on December 13, 1758. 850 innocent people who embodied the cruelty of the British Crown's deportation of this proud people. Nearly 12,000 Acadians were deported in what has become known as the Great Upheaval. Many died before reaching their destination, either from disease or deprivation. On this Acadian Remembrance Day, let us honor the memory of the departed, but above all, let us underscore the failure of the stubborn determination to wipe out a people, which constitutes a crime against humanity. The fact is, they failed. The British failed. The Acadian people stand proud and tall on their ancestral lands and everywhere else, including Quebec, where my own ancestors found refuge. Thank you, Speaker.
Vive l'Acadie! For Kelowna Lake Country.
The Liberals are set to crash through.
Did anybody else think he was gonna, or was talking about that sub that sunk over in the Atlantic? That's where I thought he was going with that.
Their so-called $40 billion deficit guardrail, which will add to Canada's already sky-high debt. Incredibly, this fake feminist prime minister is going to blame this on the finance minister, setting up her firing to replace her with conflict of interest carbon tax Carney. The finance minister admitted that deficits cause inflation and promised she would cap the deficit at $40 billion and not go a penny over. Despite this, the prime minister came along and is forcing her into spending more. The fake feminist prime minister has been working overtime, behind the scenes, to fire Canada's first female finance minister and bring in his guy, carbon tax Carney, conflict of interest Carney. This is an insult, especially when he stated just a few days ago that, quote, I am always and will be a proud feminist. Canadians deserve better than that, and this incompetent prime minister is forcing the finance minister into blowing through an already crazy $40 billion deficit.
Like I said last time,
The honourable member for Pierre
does anybody remember when $30 billion was a lot for a budget?
Cutting taxes. Unfortunately, he is not very
Before
good
COVID?
at acting on what he says. You would think that the Conservative caucus would be the first to support a GST tax credit, a tax credit that puts real money back into the pockets of Canadians. But they didn't. Their leader whipped them into voting against a tax credit for Canadians. Canadians deserve a leader that backs their words with actions, not empty rhetoric and performative outrage. This government, our Liberal government, is delivering real affordability measures for families, while the Conservatives are busy voting against solutions for Canadians. We Liberals have cut taxes where it matters, whether for the middle class or small business, while the Conservatives continue cutting their credibility.
Oral questions. Question orale. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
The Liberal Prime Minister has lost control of spending, and he's lost control of his own cabinet. The outgoing Finance Minister promised that a massive $40 billion deficit would be her fiscal guardrail, but it looks like the Prime Minister and the incoming Finance Minister, Carbon Tax Carney, are pushing her through the guardrail and over the fiscal cliff with the rest of Canadians. So will the Prime Minister stand up today and admit that he's having his outgoing Finance Minister take the fall so that he can replace her with Carbon Tax Carney?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
They are trying to distract from their voting record, Mr. Speaker. In this House of Commons, when this government put forward legislation, affirmed last night by the Senate, in fact, to cut GST for families looking to buy kids' clothes, diapers, car seats, families that want to go out to a restaurant, someone who wants to buy beer or cider. They're against that, Mr. Speaker.
Shameful.
Lots of slogans when it comes to cutting taxes, but that's all they have, Mr. Speaker. Empty slogans. When it comes down to it, we put a tax cut forward, and they voted against it.
Right on. The Honourable Member for Leeds Grenville.
Yeah, because I don't know. What do you guys think? It's just showboating when they're going to increase the carbon tax, and this GST doesn't even affect food or what people actually need to live. Or most of it, at least. Just going to take a quick pause here and say welcome, everybody. Seems like we got more people in to the thank you for 500 subscribers. First off, for Super Chats, I'll probably be saying it periodically. If anybody does want to donate, you don't have to. I'll probably say your message anyways, since we don't have a lot of people. And I'll try to keep this thing running as much as possible and not talk too much. But let me know if you guys either want me to stop and then talk or try and talk over. And then we'll make this as fun as possible. Let's get at her.
Thousand Islands, Rita Lakes.
A tiny 2-month tax trick is not going to help the more than 2 million Canadians lined up at food banks every month, or pennies off of Pepsi for Canadians who are going to pay $800 more for groceries in 2025. So this Prime Minister is forcing his outgoing Finance Minister to take the fall for the effects of his inflationary spending that's pushing his $40 billion deficit guardrail right to past and over the cliff. So will the Prime Minister admit that it is in fact his inflationary spending that's the cause of this massive deficit?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of Housing.
The lowest debt and deficit in the G7, Mr. Speaker. A 5th consecutive interest rate decline. What is that? That is good news, Mr. Speaker, for business owners looking to expand. It's good news for mortgage holders looking to renew, families looking to buy a home, Mr. Speaker, and there's many other examples. They want to distract from their record. In fact, think about the Harper years. The worst rate of economic growth had Stephen Harper going back to R.B. Bennett in the 1930s, Mr. Speaker. They're not serious about these things.
Yeah, they're trying to project. I mean, everybody knows what happened during the Harper era around 2008. It was the housing crisis, right? Where the whole world pretty much just was ravaged economically. And Canada actually came out ahead in that. So we were called in the New York Times, I think it was 2009, we had the best middle class. So I don't see that right now. We have no middle class right now. And as for rates going down, I mean, when people can't afford to buy, let's say toys and stuff like that and consume, kind of consumables and other things, inflation is going to go down, especially with a recession looming. If we're not, I think we're already in one, but if we're not in one already.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Good news. He's talking about good news like Canadians have never had it so good. The highest household debt because Canadians can't afford to pay their mortgages. They can't afford to feed themselves. They can't afford to heat their homes or put gas in their cars after 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister who said that the budget would balance itself, that he doesn't think about monetary policy, and it should be the bankers that worry about the economy. Even his caucus is calling for some fiscal sanity after 9 years of his economic vandalism. When the deficit smashes through $40 billion, will at least he allow his caucus to have a free...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
He forgot about
food banks, Mr. Speaker. We're not insensitive to that. Canadians have had a hard time. What
the
has this
2
government
billion,
done?
million people going to food banks.
We continue to show support, Mr. Speaker. They want to cut their pensions. They want to cut employment insurance. We have a school food program, in fact, that is supporting no less than 400,000 kids in 4 different provinces. They voted against that too, Mr. Speaker. Shameful. The Canada Child Benefit, today parents will see a direct deposit put into their account. Guess what? They're also against that, Mr. Speaker. They don't care.
Yes. See, I don't get the Canada Child Benefit. Why would you want to get money from the government when other countries decrease your taxes for every kid you have? I think I've said this in multiple videos, but when you pay people out money, that's inflationary, and I believe it's taxable. But in other countries, what they do is if you have like 1 kid, then the woman gets 10% off of her taxes. If she has 2 kids, she gets, I think it's like 30, and it just goes on from there. That's the way we should do it here, but the Liberals just don't have a clue, I don't think.
Honourable member for Mégantic L'Érable. Deficit. That's a very short 3-syllable word. It's easy to pronounce, and yet not only are the Liberals incapable of saying it, they won't even talk about it because they've lost control, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Finance said that she had put in place a guardrail so that the deficit would not go beyond $40 billion. So why is the Prime Minister being advised by Mark Carney? Why is he choosing to force her to blow through her $40 billion guardrail and break her promise? The Honourable Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, Canadians and Quebecers will have a GST holiday. That is great news. And what did the Conservatives say? They said that they had to cut taxes, but they sat down. And tomorrow morning, we took action. We are going to give a GST holiday to Canadians on diapers, on restaurants. Mr. Speaker, Canadians will be able to save money because of us. The Conservatives don't get it. The Honourable Member for...
And now the interesting thing is, though, before they were talking about PepsiCo and how you'll only save 5 cents on it, apparently... they fought back against the government and they said, yeah, we're still going to charge GST to our businesses. Now businesses don't even have to change their tills to deduct or not include that GST. So every business that has already done it, because it's what? Like 3.5 hours until this thing comes in if you're in the West, and probably most small businesses has already got this done, and now they just wasted their money. It's nuts. But that it just shows you, like, when a big company like PepsiCo comes in and just says, no, we're still going to charge you GST, well, the government just bows.
I didn't hear him mention the word deficit, Mr. Speaker. I said deficit. It's not hard to understand. Why did the Prime Minister force the first female Minister of Finance to blow through her guardrail, taking with her all Canadians over the fiscal cliff, while he and his friend Carbon Tax Carney watched them fall? That is such hypocrisy from a Prime Minister who said this week, well, I want you to know that I am and always will be a feminist. I'm going to try again. Does the Prime Minister have the courage to say the word deficit? And why did he force his Minister of Finance to break her promise? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I saw the Conservatives' economic statement, and it's blank. They have nothing to say about the economy. Early tomorrow morning, we're going to give a GST holiday to Canadians, and that's good news. They could have stood up and supported us on that. And what did they do? They stayed seated. So they are going to have to tell their constituents why they didn't support this holiday. And that is shameful, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Once again yesterday, the senators delayed a crucial vote on C-282 on supply management. They have been engaging in shenanigans for the past 18 months instead of adopting this one-section bill. Instead of respecting the will of all parties, the unelected senators are obstructing and filibustering. And, irony of ironies, they took 4 hours of paid breaks yesterday. Will the government denounce this sad spectacle? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, I completely agree with the member across the way. It is shameful what the Conservatives are doing in this House because some 50% of them voted against Bill C-282, and on this side of the House, we have supported that bill, and so I encourage all members to work on this to get the bill to pass. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan.
Personally, I'm not a very big proponent of the supply management whole thing. I don't think we should be dumping our milk and regulating our prices here in Canada with that sort of stuff. If we have extra, we should it should bring down the price. If we have less of it, it should go up, just like everything else. And I mean, we should be able to export and import it, because I don't know if our government got that solved with our trade in the UK, but I remember there was something about they wanted to import their cheese here, and that was canceling like the whole import-export deal. So I'll have to look that up for a later video.
I am calling on all party leaders. Every single one of them voted to protect supply management in trade agreements. So today they now have the responsibility to call on senators to respect the will of elected officials. They have to tell the unelected senators that they're not paid to take breaks, that they have work to do, even though it is very superfluous. The Lords of the Senate will be sitting again next week. Will all the leaders, especially the Prime Minister, call on them to pass Bill C-282 before the holidays?
The Secretary Parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the past few months, I have heard the Prime Minister say on a number of occasions he was encouraging the other place to adopt C-282, but I didn't hear the same thing from the leader of the Conservative Party. I know it's rough on that side of the House. Half of them voted against supply management, but everyone on this side of the House voted in favour, and we expect that the other place respect the wishes of the House of Commons.
New Westminster, Burnaby.
The Parliamentary Budgetary Officer revealed yesterday that over 2 million Canadians don't have access to adequate or affordable housing. No surprise. Average rents now in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia for a one-bedroom are over $2,500 a month. Staggering. The Liberals have simply been too weak to take on the corporate greed that is fueling housing prices. And Conservatives, of course, they will just make their corporate landlord buddies and developer buddies richer. But when will this government take on the corporate greed that is fueling housing prices, and so that all Canadians can have a roof over their head?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I mean, it's nice that they're talking about housing prices now when they don't have a supply and confidence agreement. Maybe you should have made that a priority in your supply confidence agreement before your leader, Jagmeet Singh, ripped it up and threw it away. And now the NDP doesn't have any power to do anything.
The Minister of Housing.
In fact, what the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report revealed, Mr. Speaker, is that this federal government, for the first time in decades,
well, that
back
too, it is
in
immigration
housing,
as well,
making it a serious priority, reversing decades of cuts of previous governments in particular, and with all due respect to conservative governments. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that we have more work to do, but we've seen through vital programs that would be cut by that party, like the Reaching Home program, 87,000 people lifted off the street, and almost 150,000 people who are going to be homeless, not homeless because of our strategy on that. We'll continue.
Right on. The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Temperatures are plunging in northern Canada, and the ongoing housing crisis on northern reserves is putting families and children at serious risk. Carol Ann Ballantyne lives in a moldy trailer with 3 children in Pelican Narrows, Saskatchewan, and for years she's pleaded just for a simple home to keep her children safe and warm. But to the Liberals, she's just another name on an ever-growing backlog of heartbreak and homelessness in the North, a crisis they continue to ignore. So, simple question, why is this government refusing to help this family? Why are they refusing to step up and deal with this crisis?
The Honourable Minister, Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been working since 2015 on creating partnerships with provinces, with territories, with Indigenous leaders to get more houses built all over the North, Mr. Speaker. Several years ago, we invested $4 billion in distinctions-based housing to get construction done. Last year, there was another $4 billion for an urban, rural, northern housing reserve. We're going in the right direction, and there's still lots of work to do.
Okay, that's great that you're pouring so much money in. The Liberals are pouring so much into housing up north, and we're getting nothing out of it. So isn't that a bad thing? Do they not think that this is a bad thing? And like Northern Perspective said right before, why didn't the NDP bring this up when they had a deal with the Liberals? If it was that important to them, they should have done that.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Carbon tax Carney's Canadian comeback fueled a fiscal feud for this furious finance minister. The Prime Minister forced the finance minister to crash through the $40 billion deficit guardrail promise. The PBO says it'll be at least over $6 billion. Now that the Prime Minister is done using her, he'll dump her for carbon tax Carney. Will the Prime Minister confirm once he fires his finance minister, the deficit won't be a penny over $46 billion?
Good question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While that member practices on things that rhyme with F words, our minister actually renegotiated NAFTA with Trump. Our minister introduced supports during a global pandemic to keep businesses and people going. Our minister tomorrow will see a GST tax breaks for Canadians. So while Conservatives practice their rhymes, we're delivering real supports for Canadians.
Yeah, and after that renegotiation, we got tariffs on softwood lumber that is ruining BC right now. And they did do a good job on aluminum. I'll give them that. But they pretty much destroyed us economically during COVID. So I wouldn't say that that's a plus, especially in question period.
Calgary Forest Lawn.
Their minister is the reason why Canada's economy is crapping out. And just to take dimes off of Doritos, they'll crash the deficit guardrail, taking Canada's finances off a cliff. The Prime Minister forced the Finance Minister to implement it. The PBO confirmed that they're already $6 billion past that fiscal guardrail. Canadians want to know how bad carbon tax Carney and the Prime Minister will smash through the $40 billion deficit guardrail. How bad is it? What is the deficit number?
What is it? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it's pretty clear that when the Conservatives have no real argument or debate, they just insult people. Because on this side of the House, our Finance Minister has a record of helping people in some of the hardest times that this country has ever faced. A global pandemic, global inflation. We saw another interest rate cut just this week, and tomorrow we will see more tax breaks for Canadians. Something Conservatives promised they'd do, but weren't able to. So what is it, Mr. Speaker? Is it the fact that it's our plan we're actually implementing, or they can't stand it's a woman doing it?
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peter. Order. Order. We made it into 12 questions before we really got too much noise here. Not bad, not bad. This is a record, I'm sure. This must be a record. The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Consensus among economists, experts, and even the parliamentary budget officers is that this government has exceeded all of its fiscal anchors. The only question is, how badly have they failed? Can the government confirm whether the Minister of Finance has gone way past the guardrails, or whether they've gone completely off the cliff with a $46 billion deficit?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Housing.
The members should expand beyond the Fraser Institute, Mr. Speaker, and look to, for example, what the International Monetary Fund has said, what other lead financial authorities have said in the business press and elsewhere, the parliamentary budget officer as well. Canada has a very sustainable fiscal situation, the lowest debt in the G7, the lowest deficit in the G7, a AAA credit rating, Mr. Speaker. And what do we see on the Conservative side? A plan to make cuts, including a plan to cut $10 million for housing in Peterborough, his community, Mr. Speaker. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, plan to make cuts to taxes. Woo! But, I mean, I wouldn't trust the International Monetary Fund as far as I could throw it, to be particularly honest. That's why you see things like Bitcoin and XRP and all that stuff just exploding, because and gold too, because countries don't want to deal with that stuff anymore. So, some sketchy stuff's going on there, let's just say.
Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Well, let's return to the facts here. The current and former Governor of Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, and Steve Pelosi agree the Canadian economy is in big trouble. The phantom finance minister's economic plan is failing Canadians. The sad part is these Liberals don't even know how badly. So can someone go behind the curtain on the other side and simply ask Carbon Tax Carney what the deficit is?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I know this member, he's an honourable member, and I know that he cares about his community. A few weeks ago, I spoke with Peterborough's Mayor Jeff Leo, a good man, someone who cares about his community and is doing a great job in that city. I told him about the government's plan to invest over $10 million through the Housing Accelerator Fund to build more housing. The Conservatives want to cut that investment, among others. Will he join the other Conservative MPs who are advocating for the Accelerator Fund to ensure that more homes get built? I hope that he does, Mr. Speaker. The Mayor is asking.
The Honourable Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has lost control of his spending and his cabinet. The PBO says that this year's budget deficit could be as high as $46 billion, smashing the $40 billion guardrail promised by the Finance Minister. And like so many ministers before her, this Finance Minister's time might be limited simply for standing up to the Prime Minister and his radical agenda. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he is ignoring his Prime Minister's $40 billion guardrail promise, and tell us if the deficit will exceed $46 billion?
Well, that's Trudeau's MO, to just fire whoever
Today, Mr.
talks
Speaker, the
back to
Conservatives
him.
have launched personal attacks on the finance minister, who's responsible for, among other things, the Canada Child Benefit, who's responsible for, among other things, ensuring that childcare is a priority in this country, moving towards $10 a day. What has that done in this country for its economy? Among other things, 110,000 women have been able to re-enter the workforce because childcare has now moved to an affordable level. They want to cancel that, Mr. Speaker. They say all these things about families. In the end, they don't care about families, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member.
It's interesting how they don't talk about like how many women have to re-enter the workforce because of how much they've destroyed the dollar and destroyed our economy and made things way too expensive. It's like every woman doesn't want to be a stay-at-home mom or wants to raise their kids. Every woman wants to go right back to work as soon as possible. That's what the Liberals think.
Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, from that answer, it's clear that the Liberals have abandoned all hope of keeping their $40 billion guardrail promise that was made to Canadians. While the unelected, unaccountable, and phantom finance minister, carbon tax carney, pulls the strings from the shadows, the Liberals are following their prime minister and the economy of Canada right off the fiscal cliff. Already, interest charges on our debt will cost taxpayers more than the Fed send to the provinces in healthcare. So will the Prime Minister confirm that the deficit will not be over $46 billion?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, you know, there's some really good news. Last night, the Senate of Canada passed the legislation that's going to give a GST tax break starting tomorrow for all Canadians in all regions of the country, Mr. Speaker. That is actually good news. That is something in which the Conservatives campaigned on, but oops, they actually voted against it, Mr. Speaker. They're the Grinch of Christmas, Mr. Speaker, whereas we are giving a tax break during the holiday season. That is good news.
No, can they give us a carbon tax break for Christmas? That would be awesome.
Time is running out for Lion Electric, and the federal government must step up. Lion has until December 16th to meet with its lenders. That's Monday. The federal government, sorry, yes, I meant December 16th. The federal government must send a clear message to the investors that everything is in place for Lion to resume its activities. It must tell potential buyers that electric school buses that they will receive their 50% subsidy as provided for. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with the province. We'll continue to work with investors. We will do everything we can because this is an industry that is the future of Canada and Quebec. We absolutely want it to work. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Berchel. I would have liked to have heard yes instead, Mr. Speaker. Lion employees deserve better than that from the federal government. There are 3 days left to save this Quebec flagship of green transport. Investors, the cities concerned, the government of Quebec, everyone is fighting to save Lion. But in the meantime, there's just Ottawa that is asleep at the switch. The federal government must facilitate the awarding of the full amounts of the subsidies. That is its role, and it has to do it now, not when there won't be any more of flagship. Will they step up? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, through our zero-emission public transit fund, the government is helping public transit manufacturers to serve Quebecers and Canadians. This is a good way to tell school bus operators that they will be available, and we know that we will continue to work. We want to save these jobs. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
$40 billion was a guard.
Sorry for not saying anything about during the Bloc Québécois part. I pretty much know nothing about Quebec politics, so I'm not going to say anything on that.
Set by this Liberal finance minister. Listen to this. Not an unlimited pot. need to show fiscal restraint. If we have $40 billion guardrails, stay in there. Mr. Speaker, that's not Stephen Harper. That's Liberal members of Parliament. If the deficit is over the $40 billion guardrail, will the Prime Minister allow free vote for his NDP Liberals?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Housing and Communities.
The members opposite are very fond of quoting from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mr. Speaker, as is their right. Well, they can go one step further and actually look what he recently said on the country's finances. We have a more than sustainable fiscal situation. But if it was up to the Conservatives, that would reverse. We know what the Conservative record is when it comes to running up deficits. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, to the point that's been raised, because they talk about families, what programs would they cut? They talk about this idea of fixing the budget. For them, that means cutting. And they would cut dental care, they would cut pharmacare, they would cut support for families across the board, and pensions, Mr. Speaker. They're not serious.
That's right. The Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, we're talking about what could be more than $40 billion. A carbon-taxing, coal-loving Carney, a finance minister on the run, a prime minister not into monetary policy. They hike taxes, they fuel inflation, they crash through the fiscal guardrails and off the cliff. This government is a chaotic clown show. Which one of them will call a carbon tax election?
And how long has our parliament been out of commission right now? We can't even... I'm surprised we got this GST thing through. I was quite surprised.
Just to make sure everybody's...
So glad, though, so that our parliament's
watch the words
down right now, because who knows what would happen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we see the Conservatives dive into insults because they actually have no plan for the economy. And I think they just can't stand the fact that we have a finance minister who was able to renegotiate NAFTA with the previous Trump administration. We were able to see supports being delivered to businesses and Canadians through the worst global pandemic. And, Mr. Speaker, we continue to see interest rates drop. And tomorrow we see a tax break for all Canadians. So while they want to know about a free vote, I'm wondering if they'll have a free question.
How many people who didn't qualify for all those benefits during COVID got COVID benefits? People in prison got COVID benefits, and the government's not even going after them? And you're proud about that.
Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has lost control of his finances and of his cabinet. This spat is about the astronomical deficit, because the Prime Minister is forcing his Finance Minister to increase the deficit by $6 billion for electioneering purposes. He forced her to not keep her promise, to not blow through her $40 billion deficit. Will the Prime Minister confirm that the deficit will not be beyond $56 billion? Thank you. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in my riding, it is the distribution of Christmas baskets, and I'd like to thank all the volunteers and Solange, the General Director, for their excellent work. When I meet with them, they always remind me how important it is for families who receive the Canada Child Benefit, and that is an excellent, it's some $7,000 per person, and we are so thankful for our Minister of Finance to have put that in place. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière.
Was that even an answer to, like, that wasn't even relevant to the question asked? Did she have an old person's moment or something like that? I don't want to be mean, but it kind of seems she forgot that it's question period and maybe thought it was comments.
Mr. Speaker, the facts. 9 years of Liberal government, 9 consecutive deficits. The result, the debt of Canada has more than doubled. Even the Minister of Finance is starting to quarrel with the Prime Minister because of his irresponsibility. Mr. Speaker, to solve this spat, the Prime Minister is preparing to crown the very radical Mark Carney. He's been pulling the strings for far too long. So is this Minister of Finance on her last legs, and will she replace